Hey everybody, welcome to Drive Thru Review 743. Today we're going to take a look at Return to Dark Tower. This is coming out from Restoration Games. It was on Kickstarter a little while ago, and now it's starting to trickle out into retail. And if you don't know, this is sort of a re-implementation of a 1981 game called Dark Tower, which had a big old tower, not unlike this one that you see here. And in that game, basically the AI, or the sort of computer-driven dungeon master, was in the tower itself, and players competitively adventured on a circular board around the tower, going on like little quests and having little interactions with all the various different spaces, kind of like sort of a glorified barbarian prince or other kind of roll 'em up kind of RPG light kind of experience. Now this is a very different game than that, although there is a mode that is akin to that, which I'll talk about in the review part. But this is a brand new implementation. It uses a phone to talk to the tower and manipulate the tower. The tower spins around. It's kind of like almost a glorified cube tower or dice tower, but does a lot more than just that. And then I wanted to say at the beginning, I was like, okay, I'm going to say this is designed by Rob Daviau and Isaac Childress. But then I looked, I'm like, oh, this actually has a lot of other people, so I'm going to name all of them. So it's Rob Daviau, Isaac Childress, Noah Cohen, Justin Jacobson, and Brian Neff. So 5 people are credited as designers on that, which is actually kind of a unique thing. So let's go and jump down to the table. I'm actually going to cover the Alliances expansion. And you will see some components in here and stuff like that that aren't in the retail. I'll point that out because I have the all-in pledge here. But I do want to cover the Alliances expansion as well to give you kind of a taste for that, because I have played that several times. So let's go down to the table and I'll give you kind of an overview of the game, and then we'll come back and see what I think. Okay, here you can actually see a game, sort of mid-game slash end game. And actually I just played this the other day and I said, let me just leave it set up for the video because it's got all the different components, things like I want to talk about. And I have all the different expansion bits and everything like that. And so this was a solo game here, and I was using, here you can see the Brutal Warlord, their sheet there. And so as you can see, you're going to move around to various different spaces. There you can see there's the Warlord there with his little red base. And you're going to jump around to these different various spaces, encountering monsters, going to different locations that have these little markers like that have quests, interacting with these various different buildings. Each of these different building miniatures that do come in the base game have different little things you can do to interact with them. Now in the base game, these miniatures here don't exist. You have little tokens for the different monsters. You do have miniatures for the heroes, but you have to get a separate kind of miniatures pack to kind of flesh all that stuff out. And then of course here we have the tower. And so I've now played 7 games with the tower, and I'm very curious if the battery in the tower will run out. So I'm just going to go ahead and turn it on just so you can kind of hear it a little bit. There we go. It makes kind of the old school sound there. So I've played 7 full games of this. Now granted, my games don't take very long because I played a lot of games during kind of the playtest stage. So I didn't really spend a lot of time kind of learning the rules or anything in my first couple of games to play extended games. We'll talk more about that in the review part. But as you can see here, we have the app here. I'm not going to spend too much time in the app. Just a little bit of a highlight there, so forgive my little dirty phone case there. So we're going to connect to the tower. You heard that bing there. We're going to calibrate it. It's going to spin these little like drums inside of the different levels here. So you've got 3 levels of drums that spin around. And through the course of the game, there's the tower trying to intimidate us again. You're going to have these little seals here, and these are going to come off. And you can see inside of here, maybe we need to zoom in a little bit there. It could be possible that this little seal here was holding back some of these different skulls that we're going to put in the tower. So if we go down over here, you can see there's various different colored skulls. Now the base game just has these white skulls. You've got different colored skulls here that will come in the Alliances expansion. These have different little effects and things like that. When a skull comes out of the tower, you're going to have to put it on a building in the side that it comes out. So it could come out, let's say this side, but theoretically bounce and roll based on what it hits, and it could go off to the side here. But whatever side the skull comes out of on the tower, you're going to have to put that on a building there. And if a building ever has 3 skulls on it and you have to put a skull on there for any reason, once that 4th skull would come on there, then the building will get destroyed, and those skulls that you put on there will actually become removed from the game there. So that's kind of what the tower does there. Now the other thing the tower does, let's look and see if we have any little sigils here underneath there. So none on this side, probably not when it's calibrated. So one of these sides will have sigils. Here we go. We'll show these. And these, the game instructs you in the phone and the app, it will instruct you to remove those seals. And if you see these sigils facing you, because when you sit at the table, you're going to pick one of these kingdoms here. So here's the West Kingdom down here. This is going to kind of be my home kingdom theoretically. And this side here is always going to be facing me. So as these sigils start to reveal themselves, they're almost like little curses, and they will hamper some of the actions that I can take in the game. So for example, if I'm doing a fight action or a banner action or a cleanse action here, then I'll have to pay kind of a penalty when that happens there. Although you can get different abilities and stuff like that to actually interact with these. Maybe these will be actually rewarding in some cases. So at the end of every player's turn, they're going to take their actions. They're going to pull skulls either off the board or from a bag. So if you're playing with the expansion, you play with a bag and you pull the skulls out of here so that you don't see which color skull possibly you're pulling. And then you're going to drop it in here. I'm not going to do it right now, but you're going to drop it in here, and that will signal the end of your turn. So you take your actions, pull a skull, drop it in there. And when you do that, then you are going to trigger different events, possibly in the app. It might tell you to move and activate different monsters, other things like that. You might actually sort of end the round. Now the game is played over 6 months, or 6 kind of big rounds. And you'll have an indeterminate amount of turns in each of those months. In the first month, every player gets 1 turn, the month ends. But then from there, there's like an average number of turns based on the number of players that they will get. And if you haven't beat the game by the end of the 6th month, then the tower itself here will win the game and the players will lose. Now the objective of the game is to, of course, defeat the tower and defeat the villain that you have either randomly or chosen to compete against. And there's also different quests and things like that. So this is an interesting part of the game here. So if we look over here to this little stack of cards over here, there's these companions here. And these are companions that you may get over the course of the game, but you also will choose one of them, either randomly or by choice, to sort of act as your quest giver in a way. So I believe there's like 6 or 7 different quests that you can then pair with different villains here. So here we can see Gravemaw is kind of our end boss, our big bad. And there's 6 or 7 of those. And so you could play the Gravemaw villain, but with the quest where you have to stop the invading caravans. Or you could play the Gravemaw villain where you have to instead surround the tower with like this sort of elven force to kind of surround it and bind its evil energy. Or you could play, you know, some other different bosses with some of those different quests. And then you're also either going to choose or randomly select some of these other minions. So we've got, in this case, the dragon is our level 4, the lemur is our level 3, and our brigands are level 2. You're always going to have a 2, 3, and a 4 kind of minion, and then of course a level 5 sort of evil boss villain. So again, if you do not beat the game by the end of the 6th month, then you will have lost the game. A couple other ways that you will lose the game is if you have to go and pull a skull out of the bag or off the board here and pull it in, and you run out of skulls, then you've immediately lost the game. So if you run out of the skulls, you lose. Another way that you can lose the game is if you are corrupted. And this gives us a chance here to look at the player board here. So there's a couple of things. Now this little card here, this is if you're playing with the expansion, you will overlay that, and it kind of changes up the number of actions that you can do here. Now a couple things to note here is I've got some treasures down here. You can see you've got slots for 4 treasures. You can have up to 4, and these give you different abilities, which I'll show you. You've got some different virtues that you have. You start with 2 on your board, and then those will be different per character. And since I'm in the West, I get the Champion of the West, which gives me 2 wild advantages when my character's in force. And then you have 3 other virtues that are specific to your character. These will start locked, and you can see you can spend 5 spirit here to unlock them, and these will give you new abilities. Now you can see there's 2 spots down here for corruption, and you have 2 spots, 1, 2. If you were to ever get a 3rd corruption, then you will have been corrupted and everybody will lose the game. And the corruption are little debuffs and stuff that will hurt you during the game and make things a lot harder to do. Now there is ways to clear that. Now one thing to note here is we've got some other cards around here. We've got some potions, and you can have some gear cards, different companions that you collect and stuff, and those will just give you different abilities and stuff like that. The main thing that you're going to get from some of these is different advantages. So you saw that wild advantages in the forest. The Brutal Warlord here gets melee advantage when he's doing kind of a melee action, which I'll talk about, and then a +1 wild advantage when you battle. So whenever you battle, you get that automatic advantage. Now on the player boards is kind of a player aid to kind of build in the steps of your turn, so it's very easy to reference here. Now each of the different characters has a different banner action. So the banner for the Warlord here is at the start of their turn, they get to collect 5 warriors here, and these are sort of plastic acrylic pieces. These are from the Kickstarter, the base game. It just says cardboard. So my banner actions, I get 5 warriors. Everybody has different banner actions, and then everybody can move. So you can, in the case of the Warlord, move 3 spaces. You just move around to adjacent spaces. Before you move, if you want, you can spend Spirit. So now we've seen 2 different resources here, Warriors and Spirit, and these are kind of the main resources of the game. But if I want to spend a Spirit, in this case, I can double my move, so I can move up to 6. Now you can break up your move with your chosen heroic action and reinforced action. So you can do this all in kind of any order, any kind of combination. So let's say, just for example, let's say I spent the 1 Spirit here. So now I've got 6 move. Now I could move 2 spaces and then choose one of these heroic actions. Maybe I do a quest, and then I could move 1 space and then do a reinforce, and then move some more spaces up to my movement allowance. You're always going to try to do 1 heroic action and 1 reinforced action on your turn. And again, you can move a certain number of spaces in between, before, after doing all of those. Now, anytime you do a heroic action, you're going to collect 2 Spirit. You choose any of these actions, you can only choose 1, and you can only choose 1 reinforced action. So we kind of akin to calling these experience, because kind of for doing really cool stuff, so to speak, you get some experience. So it's called Spirit, but our group tends to call it experience. And so there's a few things you can do. You can cleanse. So if you're in a spot with a building, like here, let's say we had some skulls on this building here, then you can do a cleanse action and you cleanse those right off, and these will go back into the supply to later probably be added to the tower. So that's an action you can do there. You can also battle, and you can fight any of these monsters. Now when you battle, you're going to take the app here, let's see if we can zoom in there, and you're going to choose battle right there, and then you're going to pick one of the monsters. Let's just pick the Shadow Wolves in this case, and we'll battle. And let's do this very quickly. And Shadow Wolves are level 2, so you select 2 random cards. Now buried in here, you won't see it, there's actually some really bad cards. And then you're going to take a look here. It says if you are on or adjacent to a space with at least 1 skull, you lose 20 warriors. But if I have advantages to spend, I can do that. So if we take a look at just another card here, so these are brigands. If I was fighting brigands, I could use any advantages that happen for stealth and humanoid. Whereas like for the dragon, you can use melee and beast advantages. So for example, the Brutal Warlord has melee advantages. Those are going to work against the dragon, but not against the brigands. And the wild advantages here is going to work because I'm in a battle. So the Brutal Warlord always wants to fight. If I was in a forest space, I could use 2 of those advantages there, because let's say I'm fighting in a forest. So if we take a look at this card, it says if you are on or adjacent to a skull, lose 20 warriors. But if I spent an advantage, let's say melee advantages work, I could click that. Now instead of losing 20, I lose 16. Maybe I've got another advantage, like I spend a potion that gives me a wild advantage. I'll do that. So now I'm only losing 8 warriors. Okay, good. I go to the next card, confirm that. I'll lose the 8 warriors, and then I'll lose 2 potions. So maybe I got 2 potions, I don't have to spend any advantages. But maybe I do, because if I had a bunch of advantages, you can actually migrate the card to a positive. I actually gain 3 warriors. And then no matter what, I'm actually going to defeat that monster. But if I can't pay the cost, let's say I did not have the 2 potions or enough warriors to pay the cost, anytime in the game you can't pay the cost, you got to take a corruption. Whether you're battling or questing or some other effect tells you, the app could just randomly generate an effect, that tells you to lose, 40 warriors or something. I'm kind of exaggerating there, but that kind of thing can happen. Anytime you can't pay a cost, bam, you take a corruption. Now, the other thing you can do is quest, and you'll put these little quest markers out here. The app will tell you where to put them and kind of what type of quest is associated with it. So there's different sort of quest markers here. Here's kind of the main quest marker there, if it'll focus. There we go. And then this one here I think is the guild quest marker, yes. So if you're playing with the expansion, you'll have guilds, which I'll talk about in a minute. So you'll do and go find different quests here. So let's take a look at the app here. So this one says, click that one. So this says quest in the Emerald Expanse and complete the dungeon. Or we could go here and we could go in here. It says quest in the Southern Waste and have 5 virtues. And so you can do, and just, that's easy because if you just meet it, you just go to that zone, hold that, and then you'll get that character as an expansion, or maybe you get a quest item or something like that. Now, if you want to do a dungeon, those are pretty fun. Let's go here. So we've got the one quest that's a dungeon. You'll click that. And then similar to the battle, you'll have, instead of cards, like a little area to explore. So you tap that. And you can spend 1 advantage per sort of room that you explore. So you can see this one says beast. So you need beast advantages for this dungeon. And when you put a dungeon out on the board, you put the marker, then you also put like a little indicator here, say, oh, this is the cave, you're going to need beast advantages when you go in there. So maybe we'll do that and we'll spend our advantage. So there we get a potion instead of losing warriors. And we'll keep moving around. And now we have a little path choice. We can go this way. Maybe we'll lose the 6 warriors instead of spending an advantage, back and forth. So you're going to keep exploring around until you find basically the end of the dungeon, the treasure point. And then you'll succeed at the dungeon and you'll get a reward. Or sometimes prevent something bad from happening to you. Sometimes the quest you're just doing so something bad doesn't happen to you later on. So that's the cleanse, battle, and quest action we've gone over. Now we also can talk about the influence action, and this has to do with the different guilds that are in the game. And so to do this, you need to be at a guild hall. Well, let's zoom out here a little bit and we can take a look here at the guilds. So here you can see this board here. These are randomly placed along the different edges of the board. There's an A and a B side to these. And over the course of the game, you're going to be leveling up your guild here using influence and also sort of unlocking additional companions here. So there's 3 companions that come with the expansion for each guild, and you'll randomly deal these out in these 3 slots, but there's always the same 3 companions with each guild. And again, you'll be using influence to do that. Now, influence is a 3rd resource that the expansion adds, but it's not held by the players, it's held collectively. And what you do is you will actually store it here on this little pad here. And this will be the amount of influence that is available to you. So you start the game actually with 8 influence on there. And then through different actions and things like that, you get more influence on there. And then you can spend it to upgrade the guild. It's always 5 influence to do that. But if you are on a guild hall, and these are marked with these little sort of flags and things like that, and each guild is associated with a different type of building. So this is a citadel. And always the Arcane Scouts Guild, which is currently here in the west there. You can see it has a citadel as its sort of guild hall. And it's different for each of the different guilds. And if I was at any of the guild halls on the board, I can again take the influence action, and then I get to add 2 influence on there. Now it is worth noting that at the end of each month, for every building that does not have any skulls on it, then you can also add an influence onto your pad. And depending on the scenario, that may be easier or harder to do. And we'll talk about more of that in the review part. But another action you can do is a reinforce action. So the actions that I've showed you so far are heroic actions. And again, these you get the 2 spirit after. You can also do a reinforce action, and these are going to be dependent on the type of building that you're at. So if you're at a citadel, you can just gain a free potion. So you just draw a card off the potion deck and you can use that for later. However, if you want to spend 5 spirit, you can gain a virtue, and that's how you unlock these virtues. They all cost 5 spirit. So you can do that instead. If you're at a sanctuary, you can gain spirit. Just get a spirit there. Or you can spend 5 spirit and then remove all your corruptions there. So that's a way to clear your corruptions out. If you're at a village, you can just gain 6 warriors, or you can spend a spirit to gain 12. If you're at the bazaar, you can gain a gear or spend 2 spirit to gain a treasure. So let's look at the gear and the treasure. Now off to the side here, we've got 6 different stacks of treasure, and there's 3 of each. And you can only have 1 of each type. So there's 3 long swords, you can have 1 of them. This gives you a melee advantage. Obviously will be helpful for fighting those dragons we saw earlier. Or you can get these trusted maps, and this will give you +1 to your move. So you can go along and try to collect those gear over the course of the game at the bazaar. Or again, you can spend 2 spirit to get treasure. Now in the base game, there's always going to be 3 treasure face up. In the expansion, there's 4, and there's a big old stack of treasures. There's some treasures that you add in with the expansion. You only use those if you're playing with the expansion. You don't mix those in. And again, you've got 4 slots here, so you have a maximum of 4 treasure. So that's really the gist of your turn. You're going to take your banner action, move around, do 1 heroic action and 1 reinforce action if you can. You don't have to do those, but you really want to try to do all of it all the time. And then there's 1 other reinforce action, and I kind of talked about that a minute ago, but you can also spend 5 influence off of here and then use that to upgrade that guild. Again, you have to be at the guild hall in that zone there to be able to do that. And again, this will unlock these companions and then level up this guild because these are going to start off kind of hindering you, because you can see this one here. If you exist in this zone, it's not just for the player whose home zone this is, but if your figure is in here, then you are affected by this ability, and each guild has a whole bunch of different ones. So starting out the game, you cannot spend potions. So you can have potions, but you can't spend them for any reason. Once you upgrade it, you can only spend 1, but then this, as you get a little bit better, after you reinforce, again, any of those reinforce actions I showed you, anytime you do those in this area in the west, then you gain a potion. And then after you reinforce, you gain 2 potions. So it's a good idea to upgrade these. And then there's 4 different guilds, 1 for each zone. You can see them over here. I mean, it's going to be impossible kind of to spend all your time upgrading the guilds, because you got to be dealing with monsters, going on quests, cleansing skulls, all that kind of stuff out here. Trying to go around, level your character up with gear, with treasure, get virtues. So you're kind of juggling all that stuff to try to get to the point where you can then go and do your final quest. And then usually what's going to happen is you're going to do that quest. That's going to, and then unlock the bad guy who's going to come out. And then you've got to fight them and defeat them. And that has the same idea with the different battle cards. It's a little bit more difficult and stuff like that, but it's the same idea with the battle cards. And you can always go back in and refight the head boss if you can't beat them. And usually you have to fight them 2 or 3 times to kind of whittle them down a little bit. And the game and the app will remember on the phone where you were at and that kind of stuff in terms of damaging the monster. And it'll do the same thing for the dungeons as well. I didn't show that, but if you go in the dungeon and you want to leave the dungeon, if you go back in, it'll already have been explored how much you explored it for the next person to go in. And that's a real kind of brief overview of the game. There's a lot that comes into play, the different quests you choose, the main quests, the villains, all that kind of stuff. Those different effects are going to really kind of affect the outcome of the game. And just kind of show you one example here. So here's the brigands, okay? It's a very easy sort of low level kind of minion, right? So you can see this tells you what kind of advantages you can use when you fight them. But on the back of the card, it'll give you a little bit of a hint here. So as you're fighting them, it's going to tell you stealth and humanoid, right? So these are the advantages that you need. But what they're going to do is they're going to make you lose potions. So okay, if I'm going to a battle with them, I need some potions. And then humanoid foes add skulls to buildings. So you want to be kind of careful if you're fighting them and you're low on skulls. Then you might be adding skulls directly to buildings and maybe blowing these up. One thing I didn't mention is if a building in your home district gets blown up, you get a corruption. But other than that, you blow up the building, the skulls come out of the game, that's bad enough. You can't use that building's ability anymore. And the other thing to note here is these have events. So it says brigands make you lose items. So periodically, the app will trigger that, and then if there's like a brigand adjacent to you or a brigand in the same kingdom as you, you're going to lose items. And the app itself will actually upgrade these effects, so they're going to get worse and like be more damaging. And based on how many of those guys that you've killed, that more or less might affect kind of the brains of the app. So it's kind of remembering a lot of this kind of stuff, so you're not having to do a lot of this kind of bookkeeping and things like that. So that's kind of a good sort of taste of what's kind of going on under the covers here with the app and the tower and everything. Okay, so that was a very surface kind of level overview of Return to Dark Tower. Before I forget, let me turn off the tower so the battery doesn't drain. But let me do my 3 pillars of review. So player count, play time, and then kind of the nebulous stuff. Player count, I played this at, I think, all player counts. I'm not sure that I've actually played it with 4. Now, I have played it in testing. There was a beta test with Tabletop Simulator, so I kind of simulated tower and an app and stuff like that, and then of course you played it with the board on there. So I played a lot of plays with that, and I played it, I'm kind of starting to lose track here, probably 7 or 8 times since I got the actual copy. So I've played it probably about 20 times all together. Most of those plays have been with the latest, although the changes that they've made, some of them have been significant over the course of the test period, but others have been somewhat minor. And across that, I've played it solo quite a bit, 2-player and 3-player. I don't think I've necessarily played it 4-player. I might have played it 4-player when I was testing it. Although, if you had to pin me down and say what's the best player count, I'd probably say 3 and probably 4, because I do like it when there's more players on the table and you're having to kind of juggle collectively, like the collective brain, managing all of the different things, because you're managing the skulls, trying to get those off the board, managing the monsters, trying to go after some of the quests, because some of the quests you want to go because it's just nice to have this extra companion or this quest item. But if you don't go after kind of the adversary quest, which is going to spawn every month, or the guild quest when you play with the expansion, bad stuff's going to happen to you, so you really want to try to prevent that. So in addition to like kind of the generic sort of upgrading your character, taking color of the skulls and the monsters, you kind of have to go off to the side and do some of these quests. And you want to try to level up the guilds as well if you're playing with the expansion. And because of the nature of the board, you don't really scale the board size so much. So even if you're playing solo, you have your home kingdom on the side, but you still have to kind of manage all this stuff kind of on the other side of the board. And when you're playing solo, the tower itself kind of gets in the way. Although I play on kind of a neoprene surface here in general. And I think if you had like a smooth wooden table, it's easy enough to kind of just rotate the board. Like it spins pretty easy. So it's not that big of a deal to see what's going on there, or you can just kind of pick up the tower and peek real quick. But it's kind of awkward solo. Once you have 2 players, you can kind of sit across from each other and everybody has a good view of the table. And of course with more, then, you know, it's a little bit better. But it does scale, you know, in terms of like difficulty and the amount of stuff that you have to handle. As you add more and more players, it will spawn, you know, less monsters and stuff like that. It won't be as hard, you know, effectively if you're playing solo. Now I do really like it solo. I've played it solo a bunch. It is a lot of fun. But I just like it more with other players because there's the teamwork side of it's really neat, because like, okay, you go and do this, and then you can actually trade items, you know, if you are playing with other players, if you meet in the same zone, because like one of the quests that you need to do is like collect a certain type of treasure. Well, if, you know, through the course of the game, maybe I get 2 of them, you get 2 of them, we got to meet up and trade, and that person will take those specific, I think they're called Asgol treasures, to the quest item, and then that'll unlock the bad guy. So the teamwork part of it I really like. Like it's a really part of the game that excels. And so you kind of miss that when you're playing solo. So that's player count. Now play time, the app does a good job of telling you exactly how long things take. And it's usually anywhere from an hour to 2 hours. Even with, you know, 2 or 3 players and solo games. I've had games go 45 minutes and I've usually lost, and then they usually go maybe a little bit over an hour or so, or maybe a little bit longer. Now with 4 players, you might get to like 2.5 hours, but I think initially early on, the game's very simple, like structurally and mechanically in the turn flow, but there's a lot of kind of stuff to juggle. And I could see, like, say, a 4-player game going about 3 hours if everybody's new and trying to figure out what's going on and discussing things and trying to strategize. But definitely the play time is going to come down as people kind of get to know certain things. So you're looking at like an hour, 2 hours, you know, effectively. You know, your first game, throw that out. But that's what you're looking at there. Now, although when you add the expansion, that adds a lot of cognitive load. But we'll talk more about the expansion in a minute. So the time could increase, I think, probably effectively about a half hour, 45 minutes on top of the base game time, because having all of these guild boards in play and the effects that those drive in those different regions is a little bit of a cognitive weight. And then all the expansion or companions that are associated with that, there's a lot of weight there as well. And if you collect those, you're going to have a lot more abilities and stuff that you can use. And there's a whole other quest that you have to do. The guild quest starts coming out and managing the influence. So usually I break in my third pillar and say, what is this game like? I think I'll start there comparing it to the original Dark Tower game. And I will talk a little bit about the competitive mode now. But I'm going to kind of branch off and just, I won't bury the lead. This is one of the best games I've ever played. It's amazing. It does a lot of cool stuff, and I'm going to try to sell you on why I think that, and just kind of explain to you why I feel this way. Now, comparing it to the original, It's very different in a lot of ways because in the original, this was your dungeon master. This was your random number generator. And it sort of generated as you moved from one space to the next. It effectively like rolled a die for you to generate some encounter or not. Maybe it said you were safe to move, or you were haggling with a merchant, or you're dealing with these ruins and did you find how many monsters, how strong were the monsters, what kind of treasure was there, and it would actually manage your inventory, although you could, from what I recall, do that off to the side. And it was very much a competitive game where I think you could play it solo too, but you basically had to kind of move around the board and quest in the different regions and find the different stuff and find like 3 keys in the other kingdoms that weren't yours, and then go to the tower and then, defeat it. And so this, by principle, is mainly a cooperative game, and you're still kind of doing that same kind of thing. Although the AI itself is not in the tower, it's in the phone. So they kind of pulled the brains out and put it in the phone, and then turned the tower into an actual physical object that interacts with the game, which I think is just amazing. Now, before I talk about that, I want to just mention there is a competitive game that I have played, and you can actually play it solo. I've only played it solo. And what it is you get 4 quest cards, 1 from each kingdom. You have to complete 3 of them, and they're just little things like the quest in the app is like, go do a quest here and spend 18 warriors or whatever, and back and forth. So once you do all 3 of those, you go to a space adjacent to the tower, and then you kind of go through like a long dungeon, and you try to beat it there. Now, if you don't beat the dungeon, it's been explored. So if you sort of fail halfway through, and somebody else can come in if they've completed their 3 other quests, and they can complete the game. And it's really a race game in that way. I thought it was kind of fun. Like, I want to try it with other players. Whenever we've played it, it's always just been co-op. I do want to try it with other players. I think it'd actually be a lot of fun, but like I said, I can't talk too much about it, but I like that there is that option. So if you still want to kind of do that competitive thing, it's there. And I think it feels, even solo, it felt pretty good, but it's hard to really tell because I feel like it is a race game. All right, so this thing is awesome. So what they've done is turn this into this maniacal, crazy cube tower that has these 3 spinning like drums in there. And as you drop the skulls, they get caught in these little chambers. And then as you start to remove seals, they could dump out. So, and they could also like hold on to the skulls. So it's a little bit sort of random there, where like you keep dumping skulls in. It's like, well, gosh, would you release them so that they can come on the board? And then we could actually get to cleansing them and getting them out of the game. Because if it holds on to them for so long, those are less skulls that I can pull out of the supply. And if you run out of skulls, you lose. So that's an interesting sort of little maniacal thing that the tower does. And then it has the little glyphs, the little sigils on there. When you have a glyph facing you, you've got to spend extra spirit to be able to take certain different actions. And that could be sort of annoying. And then the thing will like randomly rotate and whir and sound all nasty. So it might spin out, and then all of a sudden like 5 skulls drop out in this kingdom. And maybe opportunely, it's very bad for you, or it's not that big a deal. But then the sigils will switch, and so maybe you don't have any in front of you, but now your buddy has all 3 locked up, and they're just being really hampered, and they've got to spend spirit to basically do whatever they want, and maybe they're having a hard time getting spirit. So that's a cool little thing that it does. It's like a little cube tower, plus it spins and lights up and makes noise, and then kind of acts as like a curse or a debuff on you, which is really kind of a neat sort of table presence kind of thing, where it's just this evil friggin' thing in front of there that's just really kind of taunting you. But again, the brains have been pulled out of it and they've been put into the app. And I think that was a smart move, because they let the tower kind of be the tower. They let it be interacting physically with the board, with the pieces, with the sigils, all that stuff. So instead of it being like a computer, it's not the 80s anymore. We can put the giant microprocessor, extra RAM, all baked in, all that AI stuff baked into our pocket. Like, why try to, shore that into this big plastic device here? So they've made this a very physical presence. I think that's a really cool, smart thing that they did. And then by moving out all of that brains into the phone, the way that the app here is such a light touch. Now you'll see in the walkthrough, I barely like touch the app a little bit. It's like a couple of things, you go from one turn to the next, a couple events happen. Maybe it'll say like, hey, if there's a spot where there are these lemurs, then put some skulls out in the buildings that they're next to and move all the lemurs one space closer to the guild and their region. Stuff like that, like very simple stuff that's very easy to do. And it's presented in a way that's almost like you flip a card out of a deck. So if you played a game like, Arkham Horror or Robinson Crusoe or Pandemic or something like that, instead of flipping a deck of cards, it shows you nice big thing. I haven't played on anything with like a iPad or anything. I just use my phone every time I played with it. Because you don't really need a big screen for it. One of the things with Descent Legends of the Dark, which is a game last year that I really enjoyed, it's very heavily app driven. You're spending a lot of time in the app compared to this game. And that one I would not do on a phone. There's just no way. There's too much kind of information and stuff going on. But the UI here in the app is presented in an easy way. It's like, here's one screen. This is what you got to do. Read it like 1 or 2 sentences tops, and you can read it out to the table, and everybody's like, oh, I'll move this here, move that, boom, everything's ready to go. And so I like that. It's a very deft touch. And even with like the battle cards or exploring the dungeon, it's very easy to do that. And it's nice to, as like a narrative type of thing, it's like, okay, you're going to do things, and one person can just kind of manage the phone, and everybody doesn't really feel left out or like they have to peek in. You just say, okay, you got 3 advantages you can spend here. This is what's happening. You're going to lose 20 warriors if you're next to a skull or whatever the thing is. And then you do that, and everybody can discuss. Like your eyes and your focus is not in the phone. It's a little reference thing that kind of lives off over here. And I think that's really, really cool and really important. But it takes advantage of all of those things, like maintaining how far along you've been in the dungeon, how far have you battled down the big boss, and what quests have you completed, how many monsters are on the board, because when you go fight a monster, the brain of it just deletes the monster from its presence, so it knows how to kind of level those kinds of things up. And you have kind of the modularity of the setup. So if you think about it this way, because you've got like 6 or 7 quests and then 6 or 7 villains, and that's kind of your main sort of mashup. So all of the like permutations and configurations of how you need certain companions or quest items and things like that, because there's a quest item deck, you're not going to use 90% of the quest item deck for this specific quest. There's only 2 or 3 quest cards you're going to use for that quest, and the app kind of handles that. You don't have to go dig through stuff. It'll just say, oh, go find the quest card in the deck, pull it out. Or it's going to say, get these couple of tokens out of the box. You don't have to use all these other tokens. And it's going to kind of manage all of those things that are going on, and just in a way that's easier to reference than like multiple decks of cards that you have to like shuffle together or something with this villain and that quest and all those kinds of things. You just got a few decks of cards off to the side. It'll tell you go shuffle through there, and they're not very big decks, and pull that kind of specific stuff out that's specific for this kind of setup. And so that is great. And the way that you can sort of plug and play all of that stuff is really cool, because you take all of these sort of slices of the game. You've got the Warlord, you've got the Arkwright, you've got the Relic Hunter, and then you can try, okay, let's try with the Warlord and the Relic Hunter. We're going to play against Gravemaw, and then the quest where you have to like surround the tower with forests. That's one sort of snapshot, one picture. Now let's pull out the heroes and swap in 2 other heroes and see how those work, because there is some good asymmetry there. Or let's pull out the villain and swap in another villain with that. So you can kind of mix and match there. So the key to remember with that is some setups are going to be more or less difficult than others. I will say it seems to me, and I've played with all of the characters multiple times, it seems to me that the Relic Hunter is definitely like, I will call it the dispatcher from Pandemic. If you're playing with the Relic Hunter, you're kind of playing on easy mode, okay? And I would say if you're playing with new players, give them the Relic Hunter, because what they do is they just get potion after potion after potion. And potions are really good, and there's a bunch of different kinds, and you can use them for a variety of things, and you can trade them with people. And so that's a really easy thing to do. And I will say, like, the first sort of configured scenario, the rulebook tells you what it is. Like, you use the Ash Strider boss with the, I forget the name of the companion quest that you go on. So it's a do these things. Super easy to do that one, the way that it's set up. And I don't really care probably what character you use. Although some are a little bit more difficult, like the Recluse and Spy Master. Probably the 2 are the more difficult, quote unquote, characters. But the other characters are going to really come in handy during that main quest. But there's going to be other configurations that are going to be more difficult for certain characters and maybe a little easier for others, and that kind of thing. So that's kind of a neat thing where you can kind of plug and play that. Now, I think some people might see that as a negative, and I couldn't really argue with you too much about it, but I think that's actually a positive, because my perspective is, if I play a quest with the Relic Hunter and I beat it pretty easily, I'm like, okay, cool. Now let's try it with the Brutal Warlord and see how easy it is. Because the Warlord's really good at generating lots of warriors, but maybe this quest and setup doesn't really need a lot of warriors. You're going to need warriors for certain things 100% all the time, but there's a lot of things that you're going to need to interact with where the warriors aren't going to be really coming in that handy. So that's a really nice part of it. And so kind of sort of piggybacking on top of that, one thing that the game does really well, based on everything I just said for like the last 2 minutes, is you can really build up that difficulty level and scale it up and scale it up and scale it up. Because you take that beginning quest with maybe the Relic Hunter and the Warlord, do that. The villains definitely get harder in certain ways, like the Grave Mob villain, which I was showing you. His special ability is he basically upgrades all of the other minions faster, because the app's going to upgrade them anyway, but this is just going to upgrade them even faster. And all those little events and things like that, and the different battle cards that are going to get shuffled into their deck, that's going to change. And that's, like I said, that's what the app does. That's really cool. You don't have to worry about that. It's upgrading all these orcs and brigands and dragons and everything, and shuffling in new cards into their decks that you interact with, and triggering their events in a worse way than they were before. The app takes care of all of that, but it's not intrusive. So that's just a great example of that. So you scale all that up, but then once you kind of get good at the game, and you're going to get good at the game, I think, especially if you're kind of a seasoned gamer, if you play just the base game, after a while you're going to get pretty good at it. There's going to be certain setups that are harder for sure, but then you can add in the expansion. And the expansion is going to add that extra cognitive weight. Like I said, the guild quests, the guild actions, the guild companions, all of that fun stuff, and it's going to get that much harder. And then once you get kind of good at that, you can flip all the guild boards to the B side, and that's going to get much harder. Now, the reason the guild thing is harder is because all of the guilds start off at the level 1, and everything hurts you. Like, you can't do everything that you could do. It's kind of like having a built-in corruption in each zone until you spend time to level it up. But if you spend time to level up the guilds, you're not doing the other thing. So there's just that extra kind of cognitive load. And so because the game does that, I would say, so my perspective is I probably would rank the game probably an 8 or a 9, which is the base game. But then once you add the expansion, then it kind of kicks it up to a 10 as kind of an example. Because you can sort of gradually just build in all that stuff. So it's almost like within this system, you have kind of like Pandemic. If you just play the base game with kind of simple setup, some of the easier heroes and stuff, very Pandemic vibe. You're stomping out diseases or stomping out skulls, and there's some other events going on. You start to add in some of the layers of the more in-depth villains, and you get more stuff, and you add the expansion. It kind of turns into like Spirit Island, if you're familiar with those games. I'm assuming everybody's familiar with Pandemic watching this video, but Spirit Island's like a really kind of a complex co-op game that has a lot going on, a lot of kind of configurability with all different heroes and the kind of the bad guys, quote unquote, in that one. Once you start to get into the expansion, it kind of takes on that same kind of weight there, and that's really cool. So this is a game that can kind of serve to allow you to improve at it and get better at it, but also serve gamers a different skill level and different sort of desires. If you want to just sit down and have some fun with your kids or something like that, the game can do that, and then you can kind of gradually get into more and more complex stuff. So there you go. I kind of joked in my Game of the Year video back in last year in 2021 because I had played the test version of this so many times. I was like, yeah, if this had come out last year, it would have been my Game of the Year. And yes, it would have. If in some magical way this had come out towards the end of last year, this would have been my number one game. And I have a hard time honestly seeing how this could be replaced at this point. There is kind of the price point issue. The MSRP went up. I think it's like $190 now or something. So that's expensive, but Gloomhaven was really expensive when it came out, and it's the number one game on Board Game Geek, so I don't know. This game is really good, and to me, if you were like, this is too expensive for me, and you were somebody that bought board games, I would maybe skip some board games, in my opinion, and save up for this one, because honestly I think it's worth it. everything's just really good about this game. So hopefully I'm not trying to convince you, but hopefully you understand where I'm coming from, and you believe me, I guess you could say. But I'm just trying to express my thoughts on it, not trying to get anybody to buy anything or not. But I think this game is just awesome, and they've done just an amazing job. Whenever I take a step back and I look at this tower and I look at what they chose to do, what they chose to make it have it do, and where they went with it, and how they kind of pushed all this stuff off, everything I just talked about for the last probably 20 minutes. I'm just extremely blown away and impressed by it. So I definitely recommend it. If you can't afford it, I understand that, but try to find somebody who can and see if you can borrow it or go over and play the copy with them, because I think it's super fun and worth your time for sure. All right, thanks.